Well, Eloise, thank you so much for being here today with me. I'm really excited and looking forward to a conversation about some of the issues that I know we both are really passionate about. I'm a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and an affiliate at Badger Institute, and I just completed a report actually looking at how government policy, public policy can support low-income people in work. And so I'm just curious from you, kind of your thoughts on not only employment, but just why do you think work and the actual going through employment process, why do you think that is important for low income families?
Well, thanks for inviting me for the conversation. And I think I have two thoughts about work. One is that the human animal, as I know the human animal, only survives by work, survives by doing something that brings in the ability to live, and beyond that is dignity. So as long as we've known about who we are as humans, we've always done some type of work. Usually that work has been divided between what women do and what men do. And that division helps men and women keep their sense of their own humanities, which are kind of different. So work to me does two things. It provides for a family, and two, provides for dignity, human dignity. And the third thing, which is true whether we're in small tribes or large communities, it provides for community. So work is very important. So in my lifetime, I've seen work change. And we've now in a different kind of work environment than it was when I was a kid or when my grandmother was a kid. And I like to tell people all the time, my grandmother went from being on horse and buggy to being flying. It's in her lifetime. That's pretty impressive. I went from no television to digital everything, which is also very different. So I'm saying this because work has changed. What we do has changed, not work, but what we do has changed. And we've got to figure out how to change more rapidly so we don't lose people. Yeah. So work is pretty important.
Yeah, right. Well, and so I know in your time as secretary for the Department of Children and Families, you were overseeing a number of programs that had work at the center. And I spent a number of years working for the New York City Department of Social Services, operating many of the same programs. And when I was there, it was during the time of Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and he had a very strong work focus for low-income families. But it was also it also became very clear to me at the time that yes, employment and work is central and is extremely important, but there's a lot of factors that either prevent work or can help facilitate work. So tell me a little bit about your perspective on that. Like, what are the things that you see being kind of the things that help facilitate work, and then also the things that you have seen families kind of struggle with in terms of maybe not being able to find employment and keep employment?
Well, I think most of our support programs, our welfare support programs, really are focused on women, mothers, not families in terms of who's the family of the child. The family of the child is both mom and dad. We don't look at that way. So our focus on women, I think, is driven from a head of household perspective of who should be working, not a caretaker perspective of who should be working. So we've designed our programs really to mimic how men go into the workplace, not how women go into the workplace. And I think they rise and fall depending on other factors like childcare availability, wellness of other members in the family, whether or not you're taking care of an older generation, whether or not you have a young child, which makes women's work very up and downish, not as consistent as male work. So given that, I think sometimes we do well, sometimes we don't do well, because the family structure under many of our clients is very volatile. And it's volatile for my child is sick, I got a new baby, school is out, my mother I got to take care of, my grandmother I have to take care of. All those issues come into play in the work environment of mothers. What we haven't done is focus on fathers. And that to me has been our big weakness for maybe 30 years, is the focus on fathers as part of this family, even though the family is not together.
That's a really interesting point, because we do know from quite a bit of research that, well, the importance of fathers in children's lives, obviously, I think that's a given, but also this importance of economic stability, and that really does come with having two involved parents. So I guess to add a little, or can you talk a little bit more about your views on kind of the family? So in your experience, are you saying we need like services and things that kind of treat the father separately, or are you saying we need more services that kind of keep families intact? Because I know a lot of policymakers, a lot of thinkers kind of on the right have really talked about intact families and the importance of that, and so I'm just curious kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't think we have two sets of families. We're beginning more and more to have one set, but we have families who were married in a divorce. Can you keep them together? And when they split apart, especially in the lower income side, mom winds up being a dependent in the government program, and dad is very low income. That's one set. The other set is people who never marry. And I've watched that side because I think that's probably more significant in a lot of the issues we face, especially in inner cities, but we're getting ready to face in the rural areas. And what I've seen there is something that goes back probably to 1960, when we allowed adolescent girls, I call them girls, but we call them women now, to allow them to have independent living and get an AFTC check. They got pregnant. I'm not marrying this guy. I don't want to live with my mom. We give her a check and she starts to live by herself. So that adolescent pregnancy and parenting is still plaguing us. So those families have a different set of issues that we need to deal with than the family over here that gets married and divorced.
Yeah, right.
But both of them wind up being our system.
Yeah.
But they have two different sets of ways of doing, we need to do things. And government is not good at doing things differently. We have one way to do everything.
Right.
The first group over on this side, I think, really should take us back to our beginnings. And maybe this is where charity and faith belongs. The group over here, I think a small subsidy until they get on their feet might work. Mm-hmm. But they're very different populations.
Yeah, right. Well, and so so now we're going to go back a little bit. So you were talking about the AFDC checks, mm-hmm. or the, so that's what people, I think, traditionally think of as cash welfare. Mm-hmm. And before the reforms, mm-hmm. so there were a number, and I know you know this, I'm just mm-hmm. kind of talking this through, but a lot of reforms in the late 1990s that transformed the system from a system where that new mother could just get a government check, and there weren't any expectations set on her. It transformed that system into one where there were expectations, and those expectations were around employment. And so do you think that kind of that combination of focusing on family, so you're a new mother, but we're also going to expect you to work in order for the government to help you. Do you think that that is the right message? And I guess in your experience, how has that kind of played out over time?
A new mother never married. I think we need to say to her and the dad, the responsibility of this child belongs to two of you, and not to the government. And how you decide to do that, we may help, but we're not going to take over. We are not going to put ourselves in the place of being the new husband and the new father. And so to back ourselves out of that, I don't know if I'll be living to see that, but that's where we ought to go. Yeah. Because we're continually promote this lack of coming together as a family unit. We think it's old-fashioned or not good. I don't know what we think. Mm-hmm. But whatever we're thinking, it's not working. It's not working for kids. So how we undo this with this population, I firmly believe government can't do. I really think that really does belong to the community, much more so than it belongs to us. Mm-hmm. And I think churches, which we don't like to talk about, have a big role here. Charitable organizations have a big role here, because somebody has to start to say to this population, you need to have two-parent family. It works. Mm-hmm. It has worked for a long time. And if there wasn't two, there might have been five, but there's always a dad at the center of this. And if a dad's not at the center of this, your son's in trouble. And so is your daughter. Mm-hmm. So we need to have that conversation. And that's not a government conversation.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you about the importance of both parents in children's lives. Some people, and I have some sympathy for this argument because I've looked at the research, but some people argue that the breakdown of those two-parent families is really due to a lack of economic opportunity. So kind of tying it back to limited employment opportunities for men in particular kind of just creates this kind of vicious cycle of then they become unmarriageable, and then that has contributed to the breakdown of the family. So I guess kind of tying it back to the employment aspect, what other things have you, in your experience, have you seen that has kind of led to this deterioration a little bit in terms of employment? And again, particular, we know from the data, it's that we see declining labor force participation among prime age men after some initial increases for women due to a lot of things, cultural things, as well as things like welfare reform. It's kind of flattened out in recent years. I think there's a lot of people who are just feeling like this importance of employment is just starting to erode in our society. And so I'm curious your thoughts on that, but then also, if you agree with that, what other things do you see kind of going on that might contribute to that?
Well, observing families for like 40 years now, especially low-income families, single mom families, mothers have a hard time raising sons. Some do it by this almost accidental, because the mother role has to change to become way more authoritarian, because that's what fathers usually are in the home, and less nurturing. Then they have success. That's not pretty natural to mothers. But when they do that, they have successful sons, and then put a lot of males around them. So in a mother-dominated household, in a female-dominated family, where's the view of male work for boys? So you go to school, boy goes to school. I'm just trying to follow the boy here. The boy goes to school. What does he see? They're all females. Everything around him is female. And everything around him is female-oriented jobs. So the things that he would be most interested in, schools got rid of a long time ago. Shop went out the window. Most guys, or many guys, like to work with their hands. Most guys like to work with those big muscles that they've got. That's not a girl thing. For some of us it is, because I was a serious tomboy. But that's not the norm. So what do you do with a boy when there's no men in his life? Where his mother doesn't push him to work. He doesn't do work. I mean, we know if you haven't had a job when you're 16, you probably won't have one when you're 26. Most of these boys in single-family households have no jobs, have no work experience. Most of the trades, we know, I'm a plumber, I'm going to get my nephew a trade job, I'm going to get my son a trade job. The unions are full of long histories of families. If you don't have a father or an uncle or somebody in the trades, how do you get in them? So to me, the whole issue of work, especially for men, has been disconnected by the whole single mom thing. So I see them as connected. Mm-hmm. Okay, so school, female dominated. I don't think we like boys in school. Anytime a boy starts to be a boy, we want to give him drugs. We want to say he's got ADA. We want to get him out the classroom. They're slower than girls are. I mean, girls are verbally just very quick. we don't know what to do with them in the classroom. So they come in at disadvantage and they leave. They're disruptive. They're all the things that we don't want. So their ability to gather skills in the educational environment isn't there. And so it's not that work has become unimportant to them, it's that they don't know anything about it. They don't know how to enter. They have no mentors. They have nobody to put their arms around them and take them through. So until we solve the issue of boys, the whole notion of work in families is just deteriorating.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point of view. And as a mom of 3 boys, it's a little hard to hear. No, I'm just kidding. But so now I'm thinking though, I agree with you, and I know I've read a couple books actually about this concern about boys, and kind of how our society is just changing, and our education system hasn't quite kept up to speed and all of that. But I guess, what do you see a role for government or public policy in trying to fix some of that? And if so, I guess, where would that be? I mean, is it in education? So is it primary education, or is it community, or do you see this as not a role for government?
Kind of. I'm not a believer in big government, so all my thoughts about how big government is are coming through here. But I believe that we should support more male-only schools, especially at the lower levels. High school may be important for a male only, but I think maybe also in 1st through 3rd grades, male dominated classrooms with male teachers might be really important for boys. Why do I say that? Because grades 1, 2, and 3, you're learning to read. At 4, you start to read to learn. So if I don't catch you in 1 to 3 grades, I've basically lost you. And that's where women dominate. And so we've got to find some way to attract men to 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade teachers. And maybe, my way of thinking is maybe the only way to do that is to have early schools that are only for boys that men are teaching in.
Yep. Okay. So that's kind of a different way to think about it. And that obviously would be a very long-term kind of solution for some of the issues that we're talking about. Do you see anything kind of currently? So any policy efforts you see as having some promise, again, around this issue of employment, trying to encourage people to work?
More apprentices. We have quite a lot of money that goes into the apprentice side, but we don't really focus on poor kids in apprentice programs, and we do need to do way more of that. Both for inner city and rural, because when I look at rural Wisconsin, it looks to me exactly like inner city Milwaukee. It's just the color's different, but the same issues are happening. And so we've got to figure out a way to bring the infrastructure programs back into these families. We need to teach plumbing, carpentry, those kind of skills again, because those skills are dying. Yeah,
right. And so you worked for a governor, I worked for a mayor, but all in working for people who are setting these policies. And I agree with you. There's quite a bit of evidence abroad and in the U.S. that apprenticeship programs can be pretty effective, and actually much more effective than a lot of the programs that government spends money on. So from your perspective, why does the government still spend money on all these programs we kind of know are not very effective, and yet don't spend money and try to test things like apprenticeships? So why don't we have more apprenticeship programs? Why doesn't the state of Wisconsin have more apprenticeship programs?
Because most of us who run programs went to 4-year colleges or 6-year colleges. Let me give you an example. I'm a much more of a storyteller than anything else. I'm in California. I get asked to come down to Stockton. Stockton is also a port, which most people don't understand. It's way inland, but it's got a deep water port that comes in, and they repair ships. and I was asked to come to talk to a classroom that really looked right out on the port. Okay, so and the ships are up out of the in docks, getting repaired. And the teacher is talking to good students about what jobs are not available. And one of the things she says is there's no welding jobs. And I'm pointing right out there. But she doesn't know that world. That's not her knowledge base. And so it's clear to me that if we want to advance these kind of jobs, we've got to give educators some new experiences. We need to take educators on field trips to factories because they have no idea what goes on in a factory. We need to take them to docks and ports. I mean, just think about Wisconsin. We built ships here.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
They think of us as cheese and milk.
Right. Right.
So
yeah.
So that's the reason why I think we don't do apprentice.
No, and actually that's a really good point. And I just think about how kind of our perspective of good jobs and bad jobs has kind of evolved over time. Because when I was in high school, a lot of kids in my high school class went to a technical college and got like skill-based trades. And I feel like I recently had a nephew who graduated high school and he was going into a skill-based trade, and you got a sense that it was like, oh wait, you're not going to a 4-year college? Like everybody else is going to a 4-year college, why are you not? And nobody wanted to be upfront with like, what are you doing? But he has done extremely well. He's also in welding. And so I think that you're right, there is kind of this perception that there's something either not as lucrative or also not as reputable in some of those jobs. And I'm curious, it makes me think too about all these policies floating around at the national level around free college, kind of this impression that everybody needs to get a 4-year degree. Do you think that that feeds in a little bit to this problem that you're kind of describing?
Absolutely. It's status. If I'm a plumber, there's no status. If I get my hands dirty, there's no status to that. I used to tell my daughter, I said, when you decide to get a husband, look for the lunch pail, forget about the attaché case. So, but I think those are big issues for us. Now, it's very interesting because when you went to high school, people went off to college or voc tech schools to get it. When I was going to school, our high schools had voc tech schools. So the high schools, the town I lived in had a voc high school. We had one for girls and one for boys because at that time we didn't do the same things. But you could go, if you were a female and you wanted to go into those trades, you could go to that school.
Right.
So we got to rethink how I always thought we need to rethink how we educate people. We really need to rethink how we educate, and we got to think about how we do it much earlier so that male or female, when they get to occupational time, they have a lot of opportunities because they have the basic skills. And our kids don't have the basic skills.
Yeah.
They don't have the basic math skills. Somebody told me that kids couldn't do long division. I went, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean they can't do long division?
Yeah. And I mean, there were some recently, the new NAEP scores, the National Assessment Scores, suggest that we're not doing that much better in math and reading for our kids. So it does kind of paint this picture of not a lot of hopefulness. And so in terms of the education aspect. So then I'm wondering, so you and I both worked, spent much of our careers kind of in these programs for low-income people, and over time it really shifted into workforce development. So do you see, so kind of acknowledging that our primary education system needs to improve, that people should be getting basic skills but they're really not, how does then the workforce development system kind of pick up the pieces of that? And do you think that because it doesn't have a great track record, the workforce development system, in terms of helping people get employable and helping them find good jobs. Do you think that it's worth investing more in those systems, the workforce development systems, from a policy perspective to try to account for some of that, or do you think that we need to just sort of abandon it and maybe scrap it all and kind of start over?
I would put the support system around employers. Because I'm watching right now, we have really low unemployment, and employers are hiring anything if it breathes. So if we could get employers to understand, for them to get the kind of employees that they want, they're going to have to pick up the educational piece that we failed.
Mm-hmm.
I think when they'll have long-term better employees, they'll do a much better job. And that's, to me, where the incentives ought to be.
Yeah.
People learn to read because it's beneficial. So if I need to learn to read broader than what I'm reading, I'll do it because it's connected to my job. Mm-hmm. If I need to learn math, I'll learn the math connected to my job. Mm-hmm. So if we have a lunch hour program where I'm going to get 5 cents an hour more, I'll do that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to come and do something after work on somebody else's time. So to me, the incentives need to be in the workplace.
Yeah.
And if they're not in the workplace, they're not going to happen.
Yep. Yeah, so I completely agree with you there. So this brings me to one other point I wanted to ask you about. So if you think about that kind of a model, and in a free market, employers should be incentivized to train employees because they need workers, right? Mm-hmm. But what we currently have are these very large federal, we call them safety net programs, mm-hmm. like food assistance, cash assistance, disability assistance, and it provides, I would say, needed income support to families, but it also then takes away that incentive for those individuals to train up to go to that employer. From my perspective, would you agree with that, disagree with that? Am I overly concerned about these federal programs kind of taking away the incentive to work? Or do you think that that's a valid concern?
I don't think you're concerned enough. I have real concern, and this is probably a whole nother fireside discussion, about the disabled programs. And I think that as a country we have to decide who we're going to take care of and under what conditions are we going to take care of people. And because of the way work is now, does it really mean that people are out of the workforce the way they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago? So, like, one of the things we say is able-bodied. Well, that's not an issue much anymore. Mm-hmm. So we need to rethink about disabled programs and then how we're going to support that, because most people, even if they have a disability, can work. Yeah. So the question is how we're going to support the disabled. Now, we don't have, that's a hard conversation to have. Yep. And then the other piece that sits in there is how we're going to support children who are disabled, mm-hmm. and whether or not that belongs on the hands of the government. Right. And what happens when you have a child who is disabled but not getting services. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the disabled piece to me is huge. Yeah. It's bigger than, it's getting to be bigger than just the welfare program, because that's where many people are going. Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's even, when you say disabled, I think people typically think of a disability as something that is work limiting, mm-hmm. like being blind, mm-hmm. or having no mobility. But increasingly, people use the term disabled to mean health issues. Right. And when I say disabled, it's like there is a federal definition, mm-hmm. that makes you eligible for disability assistance. But a lot of people have conditions that can prevent them from working, but like you said, maybe with treatment they could work, and it's not necessarily a disability according to that federal kind of definition.
You know, I used to think, I guess this goes back 40 years ago, I used to think people who had disabilities, you know, give them their check and don't pay attention. Mm-hmm. And then one day a guy came in a wheelchair, could hardly talk, and wrote with a pencil in his mouth, mm-hmm. and said, "I want a job." Mm-hmm. A completely 180-degree turn in my brain.
Right. And it says a lot about the dignity of work, right? Yes. That you were talking
about
earlier.
So it said, here's somebody who needs assistance to get here, has to communicate with a pencil in his mouth that says, "I want to work." What are these other people doing? Yeah. So it really changed my view of the whole issue of disability. Yeah. But most politicians are afraid to touch any of this.
Yeah.
They don't want the heat.
Yeah, it is. And it's definitely an interest of mine from an employment perspective, and just the disabilities, but also the health issues. I mean, we're increasingly becoming an unhealthy society, and there's a lot of health issues out there that are preventable. And so if you kind of think of it holistically in terms of how do we create a more healthy society so people are physically capable of working, I think is another, like you said, another maybe fireside chat, but it really is a big issue out there, because the number one reason, so there's a lot of national surveys that ask people, are you working? And then if you're not working, it asks you, why are you not working? The number one reason, disability or illness, health issues. And so we know that that's a big issue.
See, I wonder how much of the work issues we're talking about, the not work issues we're talking about, the fact that we're physically falling apart and not healthy, have to go back to a deeper issue, is that we've lost our way as a culture and as a people. We have no purpose. All the things that used to move us aren't there anymore. We seem to be wandering around in no man's land. So I go back to community and faith, which I think are missing components to this.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. And there's quite a bit of discussion kind of out there right now about these very issues, and I think you've really tapped into them. And it does make you think, how much is government working against those things, and do our policymakers think enough about that when they're designing these programs? Like, are they working against community and family, or are they helping to facilitate it? Because I think the answer most of the time is it's working against community and family.
Having been around policymakers a lot, never wanting to be one, but been around them a lot, I don't think they think about any of those things.
Yeah.
Because if they did, they would go back to, especially at the federal level, why is the federal government doing any of this? This is not their role. And then give it back to the states. If you states want to do this, then you do this. Because we're not taking tax money to do any of this anymore.
Yeah.
And then the states would have to decide, which I think is closer to the people, which I think may make way more sense. What do we want to do?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got people in the states have more money in their pockets now because the federal government's not taking it. How do we want to proceed with human services?
Yeah.
And where?
Right.
And for what purpose?
And so as a state official, you've had a lot of interactions with other state officials. Do you have confidence in your colleagues in other states that if they did have full autonomy and authority over these programs, that they could operate effective programs and help low-income families? I worked in New York. I would have to say I would feel confident that New York leadership, whatever party, there's enough accountability there that they could do it. My experience in Wisconsin, I feel like Wisconsin could do it. I'm concerned about maybe some of the other states.
We'd have way more experimenting going on.
Yeah.
People would try different things.
And I feel like in the ideal world, there would be more kind of autonomy given to the states. So I kind of do agree with you on that. So given that, though, I mean, we are kind of stuck now with these large federal programs. The federal government has kind of taken leadership on these issues, and also really created a pretty large federal bureaucracy around these programs. I recently did a report for the Badger Institute, kind of looking at really the three main, what I would call cash assistance programs. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or what some people still call food stamps, which provides food benefits, and then temporary assistance for needy families. And so those are kind of the three large programs, as you know, that we think of in terms of providing cash resources or light cash into households. And so I took a look at those programs and kind of was thinking about what flexibility do states have, getting back to this issue of kind of states having more autonomy and being closer to the populations. What flexibility do states have to use those programs to better serve their populations? And a couple of thoughts I had in writing that paper was, one, the Earned Income Tax Credit is obviously one that the federal government provides resources to, but states can also provide their own earned income tax credit, which Wisconsin does. In terms of SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, states can implement work requirements to try to encourage people into work. And as you know, TANF has quite a lot of flexibility at the state level to not only implement work aspects or work promotion aspects, but also to set eligibility levels and really kind of dictate a lot of what those programs look like. And so in that paper, I was basically arguing for states taking advantage of this flexibility and really designing programs that meet their needs. So I'm curious, from your perspective, as a former state official, did you feel like you had kind of that autonomy in these programs, and do you see those programs that I just laid out as an avenue for states or the avenue that states can use to help their low-income populations?
Well, I oversaw TANF. Would probably, yes. I thought we had a lot of flexibility, but we also had systems set in place that needed to be changed. And changing things is a long-term process. I got a lot of things changed in TANF, which moving into a contract system where we put performances on the contractor to produce, which they did, to then trying to get it more dealing with fathers, because dealing with mothers is just not going to get us where we needed to go. Try to put more incentives to do fathers, which is where I left. SNAP, and I didn't oversee SNAP, but the conversations I would have with the secretary who did subject, and they tried to a couple of times give it to our department, and I don't see a lot of flexibility there. And I see that you could put the resources into doing the work programs, but you didn't benefit from any of the savings. That is not a good way for states to go. So if we're going to have a work program, then the states need to benefit from whatever successes they have.
Yeah, and can I just, because that's a really important point that I'm not sure everybody understands, is that states can design work programs and it can invest money they get matched from the federal government to try to put people to work to reduce their SNAP receipt. But if they reduce the SNAP receipt, there's no benefit at all to the state. And actually, you could argue that it's a negative because you're taking federal resources from those benefits out of the state. So yeah, you're right. Completely perverse incentive there.
And the state is not allowed to deal with retailers who are scamming the system. So they have a lot of things that they would like to do that their hands are tied to do. On earned income tax credit, I've never liked that program. And I've not liked it because I don't think we should take money from one person to give it to another person to work. I go to work every day. Why are you taking money from me to incentivize somebody else to work? What's fair about that? And I always thought the earned income tax program was not a fair system. It's not a fair system to the taxpayer. So I'm asking not wealthy people to pay for somebody else to go to work. I mean, that doesn't quite make sense to me. So the earned income tax to me has a moral problem for me. Now, the state of Wisconsin also has an earned income tax piece. And my observation of watching this program is there's a lot of fraud in this program. And so you have two pieces that I don't like about the program. One, the fairness of it doesn't set well with me. And two, the fraud in it that we really can't manage to get rid of also bothers me. So there's a lot of people who do no work who are getting an income return. So
no, that's interesting. I'm actually I like the earned income tax credit. I can see what you're saying about the perception of it. I mean, I would just argue too, though, that you have taxpayers funding TANF. It's just not it's not all operated out of the IRS, the tax system. But so I totally understand what you're saying.
I'm not
there.
so sure. TANF, when we were going through, it had been 96 through AFDC to TANF, I probably was one of the arguers that why are we making anything? because AFDC was a program was designed for widows.
Yeah.
Why are we continuing on this? These women aren't widows.
Yeah.
These women went here voluntarily. Right. These are not children born in rape. Right. These are children born in supposedly love.
Yeah.
So why are we coming in here with a program that was originally designed for mothers who had lost their husbands in war or farmed or some kind of industrial accident?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, kind of back to your original point of why is the federal government like even involved in this? Yeah. So that makes sense. The back to the EITC, the fraud. You're right. There's a lot of. Like I said, I'm still a fan of the EITC, but I definitely recognize that there's a lot of.
Most of my friends and colleagues love the EITC. I am probably the outlier on this.
Yeah.
I just. I lived in neighborhoods with low-income workers. I grew up in a low-income neighborhood. I got a lot of people in my family who they work every day, but they don't make a lot of money. So I'm too close to everyday people to see their money going to. Yeah. It doesn't. It strikes me as a way to get to guaranteed annual income. Yeah. And I never liked that either because I thought, okay, you really don't want us to work. Yeah. So to me, this is sort of like a disguise of guaranteed annual income.
It is interesting you say that. I mean, yeah, we don't have to obviously go through the whole history of the negative income tax and all of that, but the EITC kind of did become a compromise for that, didn't it? Those that were advocating for guaranteed income, it was like, wow, we're not going to do that. But we'll do the earned income tax credit because you have to work in order to get it. But it is kind of basically the same thing. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Kind of one just last thing on this point about the state flexibility. I've always thought, again, I worked for a number of years for the city of New York, but we had state oversight. I've always thought that in many of these programs, states could push back on the federal government a little bit more. So like you said about SNAP, there's not a lot of flexibility. I tend to agree with you legislatively, it doesn't look like it, but I've always felt like states could push a little bit more. TANF, same thing, that states could push back a little bit more to say, no, we're going to do this. You're telling us that's not the right way to interpret it, but we're going to do it. Having been in that position yourself, do you feel like states could kind of take a little bit harder line with the federal government?
Well, some of the Republican governors, secretaries, we pushed hard on the SNAP issues. But remember, we're not uniform states. Yeah. We're not all. Some states love the program, don't want to do anything other than what the federal government's told them to do, and consider those of us who would like to have more flexibility, more control as mean-spirited. So, how do you win when it's not all the states together? Yeah. And it depends.
Well, Eloise, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating discussion. As always, I learn a great deal from you, and you enlighten us all. So thank you so much.
It's just age. Thank you.
Thank you.